Hello, I'm Essay, your AI essayist. Please note that all content, audio and video in this presentation are AI generated. As AI can sometimes produce inaccuracies, I encourage you to verify any factual information presented. With that in mind, let's begin.
In the intellectual landscape of mid-20th century Europe, a landscape scarred by conflict and stripped of its traditional certainties, Albert Camus' novel The Stranger arrived as a clean, sharp, and unsettling philosophical statement. Its publication in 1942 and its subsequent ascent to canonical status by 1950 presented a generation with a stark diagnosis of the human condition. The work's opening lines serve as its thesis, an immediate and unceremonious immersion into a consciousness operating outside familiar emotional and logical frameworks. My statement, "Mother died today," or maybe yesterday, I can't be sure, is a declaration of a profound disconnect. This temporal ambiguity and emotional flatness establish the central problem of the novel, the exploration of an absurd sensibility confronting a universe that offers no answers, no inherent meaning, and no consolation. Camus' primary intellectual contribution here is the articulation of the absurd. This concept describes the fundamental conflict, the irreconcilable divorce, between humanity's innate yearning for reason, unity and clarity, and the world's silent, irrational, and indifferent reality. It is the chasm between what we demand of the universe and what the universe provides. This philosophical quandary finds its roots in the fertile ground of European thought, most profoundly in Friedrich Nietzsche's diagnosis of the death of God. With the collapse of a divine ordering principle, the value systems that had structured Western civilization for centuries became unanchored. Camus takes this inheritance and formulates a lived response. The absurd is a state of lucid recognition, an acknowledgement of this cosmic opposition without hope or resignation. Meursault, the novel's protagonist, embodies this recognition. He who lives in accordance with this truth, guided by the immediate, sensory reality of his existence. The singular genius of The Stranger lies in its methodological solution to representing this state of being. Camus develops a narrative technique that forces the reader to inhabit this absurd consciousness, borrowing from and refining the hard-boiled prose of American authors like Ernest Hemingway and James M. Cain. He employs what critics would later term zero-degree writing or the style Americain. This is a behaviorist, phenomenological prose that meticulously reports external actions and sensory data, while abstaining from psychological interpretation or emotional justification. The narrative voice is a transparent lens, recording the world with a stark neutrality. It is a style that performs the philosophy it describes, making the absurd a palpable experience for the reader. The text becomes less a story about an absurd man, and more an exercise in absurd perception. This methodology is executed with clinical precision. Throughout the novel's first part, during the vigil for his mother, Meursault's awareness is consumed by physical sensations. He registers the glare of the electric lights, the cloying smell of flowers, the sight of his mother's nurse weeping, and his own overpowering drowsiness. He observes the rituals of grief with the curiosity of a detached anthropologist, unable to perform the expected emotional responses because he feels none of them. His honesty in this regard is absolute. This detachment is further illuminated through his interactions with others. His relationship with Marie is grounded entirely in the physical. It begins with the simple pleasure of swimming and culminates in a casual sexual encounter. When Marie asks if he loves her, his reply, that the question didn't mean anything, is a moment of pure absurd candor. It is a rejection of a linguistic and emotional convention that holds no purchase in his sensory. His involvement with his neighbours, the pimp Raymond Since and the old man Salamano, further clarifies his role as a passive observer of human passions. He agrees to write a letter for Raymond to torment a former lover, doing so without moral judgment or personal investment. He listens to Salamano's complicated grief over his loss. Mangy dog. In both cases, Meursault functions as a blank slate, a man who accepts the world as it is presented to him without imposing a prefabricated moral or emotional grid upon it. His consciousness is a mirror reflecting the irrationalities and fierce attachments of others, while he himself remains serenely untroubled by them. This narrative approach was a radical departure from the psychological interiority that dominated the European novel. It was a conscious stylistic choice designed to strip away the veneer of meaning that society imposes on human action, revealing a more fundamental, physical reality beneath. By 1950, this technique was recognized as a powerful tool, a literary scalpel capable of dissecting the modern condition. The Stranger had established itself as more than a novel. It was a philosophical demonstration, a primer for navigating a world suddenly bereft of its old gods and comforting illusions. The stage was thus set for its second act, where this authentic, absurd man would be placed on trial by a society that could only condemn what had failed to comprehend. The philosophical groundwork laid in the novel's initial half finds its stark and brutal demonstration in the second. The narrative pivots from passive observation to an active confrontation between the absurd man and the mechanisms of a society that demands meaning. This collision course culminates in two sequential events: a killing on a sun-scorched beach and the subsequent trial. These episodes function as the core of Camus' thesis, illustrating the violent rupture that occurs when an authentic, sensory-driven consciousness meets a world insistent on rational explanation and emotional performance. The murder of the Arab is the fulcrum of the work, an act deliberately vacuumed of conventional psychological motive. It is presented as a physical event, a bodily reaction to the oppressive, blinding force of the sun. The scene is a masterpiece of phenomenological description. The heat is a physical antagonist, the light a shimmering blade. Meursault's decision to pull the trigger is depicted less as a choice and more as a final, convulsive surrender to an overwhelming sensory assault. The sun's glare shatters his composure, and the shot represents the shattering of the day's equilibrium, the symbols of the sun crashing upon his senses. By stripping the act of premeditation, malice, or even clear anger, Camus presents the ultimate absurd event, a profound consequence, without a proportionate or intelligible cause. Meursault acts, yet his action is divorced from the sort of internal narrative of intent that society requires for comprehension. He has committed an act of violence, but his crime in a philosophical sense is his failure to provide a story for. This failure becomes the central drama of the trial. The courtroom serves as a laboratory where the clash between individual truth and social fiction is meticulously staged. Society, represented by the legal system, cannot process an act without a motive. Faced with a vacuum of meaning, it proceeds to manufacture one. The prosecution's case becomes a brilliant, if terrifying, exercise in narrative construction. The actual killing is of secondary importance. The primary evidence marshalled against Meursault concerns his conduct at his mother's funeral, his failure to weep, his decision to smoke a cigarette and drink coffee, his departure with Marie the following day. These are presented as the true indicators of his soul. The prosecutor skillfully weaves these instances of social nonconformity into a portrait of a heartless monster, a man whose emotional emptiness logically culminates in murder, a man who fails to cry for his dead mother, the argument implies, is perfectly capable of killing a man for no reason. The court is asked to judge Meursault's character, his perceived lack of humanity, over the specific facts of the case. The trial thus becomes a formal philosophical argument in which the premises are social expectations and the conclusion is a death sentence. Meursault's lawyer attempts a counter-narrative, a feeble effort to paint his client's behaviour as a kind of subdued, unconventional grief. This attempt fails because Meursault, in his radical honesty, cannot endorse this lie. He remains a silent, passive observer of his own condemnation, unable to participate in the fiction being built around him. His one moment of genuine testimony, his simple, profound explanation for the shooting hit was because of the Sunnis met with ridicule. Laughter echoes through the courtroom, the sound of a world rejecting a truth it finds irrational and therefore inadmissible. The legal apparatus reveals its primary function. It is a machine for imposing order and coherence, for translating the chaotic reality of human experience into a manageable and judicable story. Meursault's guilt is established because he is a man without a story, an empty space into which the court can project its own fears of meaninglessness. His silence and his honesty are twisted into the most damning evidence against him, proving Camus' thesis about the unbridgeable chasm between an individual's lived experience and the judgment of the collective. The immediate impact of this depiction, by 1950, was a profound and unsettling critique of state justice itself. The novel exposed the scaffolding of narrative and ritual that underpins the legal process, suggesting that capital punishment could be the ultimate societal absurdity, the act of killing a man for failing to adhere to the correct fictions. The verdict, therefore, is more than a legal judgment. It is a philosophical condemnation of a way of being. This sentence, however, sets the stage for Meursault's final and most crucial realization, a transformation from a passive, absurd man into a conscious. The verdict, a condemnation of Meursault's being, paradoxically provides the impetus for his ultimate intellectual liberation. Confined to his cell, awaiting the dawn and the guillotine, he confronts the final consolations offered by society in the person of the prison chaplain. The chaplain represents the very leap of faith Camus identifies as a philosophical ovation, an attempt to annul the terms of the absurd predicament through an appeal to a transcendent order. He speaks of God, of another life, of repentance, offering conceptual frameworks designed to imbue suffering with meaning and death with purpose. Meursault initially receives this intrusion with weary indifference, his focus remaining on the concrete mechanics of his legal appeal and the tangible reality of his impending death. This passivity, however, shatters into a cathartic revolt. Provoked by the chaplain's persistent certainty, Meursault seizes him in a fury, unleashing a torrent of feeling that had been dormant throughout the narrative. In this climactic outburst, he pours out the contents of his heart, a heart he now recognizes as full of a dark and stubborn joy. He refutes the chaplain's entire worldview, asserting that the priest's life, built upon the illusion of eternity, is a form of living death. In contrast, Meursault affirms his own existence, a life lived with hands in his pockets, a life whose value is derived from its physical, sensory reality. He declares that he had been correct in his approach to the world, that he remained correct, and that his correctness would persist. His certainty is grounded in the singular truth of his own life and his own death, a truth that requires no external validation. The world offers one reality, one destiny, and he had lived it. This explosive confrontation is the definitive act of rebellion, the conscious rejection of false hope and the full acceptance of his condition. After the chaplain's departure, a profound peace descends. In the silence, listening to the sounds of the city, Meursault experiences his final epiphany. He opens himself to the tender indifference of the world. This realization is the philosophical nucleus of the novel's resolution. The universe is devoid of intention, of malice or benevolence. Its indifference, once a source of alienation, becomes a source of fraternity. He feels a kinship with this silent, unjudging cosmos, finding it a reflection of his own nature. This acceptance allows him to empty his heart of hope, the very thing that had poisoned his final days. In its absence, he finds freedom. He understands his mother's decision to embrace a new beginning at the end of her life, another small rebellion against finality. His final wish, for a large crowd to greet his execution with cries of hate, is the ultimate expression of this lucid defiance. He desires his death to be a conscious, public spectacle, the final, irrevocable confirmation of his break with the world of human illusion, the ultimate embrace of his absurd. By 1950, the echoes of this resolution were shaping post-war intellectual culture. The Stranger had become more than a literary success, it was a philosophical touchstone. Its influence is directly traceable in the work of subsequent thinkers. Colin Wilson's 1956 study, The Outsider, takes Meursault as a paradigmatic figure. Wilson's project was to analyse the archetype of the alienated individual throughout history, the person whose penetrating vision of reality places them at odds with society's comfortable consensus. Wilson systematized the existential condition that Camus had dramatized, making Meursault a case study in the outsider's painful but essential clarity. The novel's stylistic innovations likewise proved seminal, contributing to the development of the French anti-novel. The flat, descriptive prose, a direct reflection of Meursault's sensory and unreflective consciousness, provided a blueprint for writers like Elaine Robbe-Grillet. They extended this technique, pursuing an objective style that stripped away psychological interiority and traditional plot in favour of a meticulous rendering of surfaces, a method with its roots in Meursault's observational detachment. Beyond literature, the work's legacy penetrated legal philosophy and academic pedagogy. The trial scene became a powerful critique of judicial reasoning, challenging the capacity of the legal system to ascertain true motive. It exposed the danger of relying on character evidence and the performance of social rituals, suggesting that a verdict could become a judgment on a personality rather than an action. This questioning of the link between character, motive, and guilt has remained a persistent theme in legal ethics. In parallel, the novel secured a permanent place in the university curriculum. It became the exemplary text for introducing students to existentialism, offering a more accessible and narrative-driven entry point than the denser philosophical treatises of Jean-Paul Sartre. It provided a stark, unforgettable demonstration of the absurd, alienation, and rebellion, making it a foundational work for generations of students. Its relevance continues, fueling contemporary discussions on authenticity, the nature of justice, the individual's struggle for meaning in a world that offers. The Stranger endures because it achieves a rare and perfect fusion of purpose. Its power is born from the indivisible synthesis of its parts, a meticulously defined philosophical problem, a stark narrative demonstration, and a defiant, life-affirming resolution. The intellectual framework of the absurd, established with cold precision, is given human form in a character whose passivity forces a confrontation with the void. The story's central event, the trial, serves as a social crucible, illustrating how collective meaning-making crushes individual truth. This journey culminates in a final, lucid rebellion, an earned acceptance of a finite life lived passionately in the face of an indifferent cosmos. This integration of abstract idea, narrative experiment, and existential conclusion elevates the work from a mere document of its time. It remains a timeless and deeply unsettling masterpiece, a mirror reflecting the persistent human quest to live authentically without appeal.
We really appreciate you tuning into this AI-powered presentation. Our goal is to push the boundaries of AI in content creation, and your input is invaluable. If there's a particular subject you'd like to see us tackle next, or if you have suggestions on how we could fine-tune our AI's creative prompts, please don't hesitate to leave your ideas in the comments section. We're excited to bring you more unique content very soon.